tonight we're going to really look at just 2 verses, and it'll be part of our discussion of the first 30 minutes of our discussion. This week, I'm going to be turning to a discussion entitled Faith versus Faithfulness. We'll talk about these twin concepts of the biblically important idea of having faith and expressing our faith in a life of faithfulness to the God that we claim to have faith in. And how do these two concepts fit together? How do they work together? Are they meant to be opposed to one another, or are they meant to work together? I think most of you know the general overall answer is that faith and faithfulness work hand in hand. But let's articulate this. Let's just talk about some of the verses that use these words and the ideas and how they are practically important for us today as Jews and Gentiles in Messiah. So for our liturgy, just briefly, I've got 2 verses pulled up. I've got out of the Tanakh, I've got from the book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, a familiar verse, Habakkuk 2, verse 4. And for the English, I'm just going to read the wooden interlinear version that I've got pulled up from BibleHub.com. Those of you who are with me in the live class right now can see this on my screen, as well as those of you who are joining me by way of the YouTube video. You can also see this. This is kind of a busy looking page, but I've got the Hebrew right here, and below that I've got the English wooden translation, and then below that that's what we call the morphology. It tells me the parts of speech and the person and the just the different inflections and things like that. Strong's number is also shown up here, and then we've got a transliteration of the Hebrew, and then we'll do the same for the Greek verses that we're going to read as well later. But Habakkuk 2:4 in the English, again, this is no true English version, but it says, "Behold, the proud not is upright, his soul in him, but the just by his faith shall live." And I just read that wooden translation so you can get kind of an idea of exactly where the Hebrew words follow as well. The Hebrew says, "Hine utla lo yashra nafshobo v'tzadik be'emunato." And we'll talk about why I read this particular verse a little later on. I'll highlight some of the particulars of this verse, some of the Hebrew highlights. But for now, let me turn to the same verse in Greek. And this is from the Septuagint. And those of you who are seeing the screen right now, what I've got is kind of a modified KJV up the very top. This is from a website called greekdoc.com. Very helpful website, I might add, too. So we've got a kind of a modified KJV at the English at the very top. Then we've got the Masoretic Hebrew right in the middle. And then we've got one reference of Greek text. I believe this is the Alexandrinus Greek text here from that version, or what we might simply call the Aleph version of the Septuagint, the Aleph script. The Aleph texts, and then we've got a translation that I can't remember the gentleman's name, a very famous Septuagint translator. If I recall his name later on, I'll let you know. But his translation shows up next to the Alexandr. That is such a tongue twister. The Alexandrinus text version. From Alexandria. And then below that, there's another Greek resource, which is the B text, what was it? The Vaticanus text, or what we call the B version. So basically, the top one here is the A version, and this is the B version of the Septuagint. And there are many different manuscripts, but these are the two of the most widely used because they're so complete. They're lacking. They don't have as many missing parts text. And then the translation over on the English on the right side is this particular author's own personal translation. The author of this particular website is a gentleman by the name, I think, John Barach, if I'm correct. Okay, so that's what you're looking at on the page. And so I don't want to read all the Hebrew all over again. And I don't want to read all the English all over again. Really, the only phrase that we're interested in right now is basically the last clause, the one that most of us are familiar with from reading the New Testament, but the just shall live by his faith. So again, the modified KJV simply says in English, but the just shall live by his faith. The Greek says, ha dedikaios ekpistios mu zesetai. This part right there, from the A version, the A script, the A translation, or the A codex of the Septuagint. The B codex is identical, nothing changed. Ha dedikaios ekpistios mu zesetai. And again, we'll talk about why these texts are relevant for us a little later on. But first, let me read 2 verses out of the Apostolic Scriptures, part of our liturgy. Again, Romans 1:17 this time, which pulls in the same text, the same quote. Paul utilizes this passage from the book of Habakkuk. And he says, the righteous for of God in it is revealed from faith to faith, as it has been written, and the righteous by faith will live. The Greek says, Dikaiosune gartheo in auto, apokalyptetai, ekpistios eis pistin kathos gegraptai. And then the phrase we're primarily interested in, ha dedikaios ekpistios zesetai. That's Romans 1:17, for the just shall live by faith. The famous verse that Martin Luther was known for. And then we've got one more verse that I just want to use from the Apostolic Scriptures, Galatians 3:11. Paul once again utilizes the Habakkuk verse. This time the whole verse from Galatians 3:11 from the modified English, or the wooden English, says that now by the law no one is justified before God is evident because, and then Paul quotes the verse, the righteous by faith will live. The Greek says, hati de en namo udes dikaiutai para totheos delon. Hati, and then here's our phrase, ha dedikaios ekpistios zesetai. All right, before I jump into the study, let me go back and just talk a little bit about these verses and how they impact us. If we look at the Habakkuk 2:4 original Hebrew, the thing that kind of jumps out to us that we should notice is that the writer to the book of Habakkuk says that the just will live by his faith. Even the wooden translation has this, by his faith. And this is evident by in the Hebrew, the very last letter there, the vav with the dot over it, pronounced O, indicates that this is a possessive noun. It's referring to the faith of the person. The person, the just, the tzaddik, this noun right there, will live by the faith that he has, or the faith of him by the, preposition, and then the noun, the emunah, the Hebrew word here, emunah, and then the very last 2 letters with the final letter tacked on, emunah to. So this tells us basically that he will live by his faith, not too difficult to understand. But when we get to the Septuagint version, we can begin to compare. In the Septuagint, the Greek says, ha dedikaios ekpistios mu zesetai. This Greek word right here, mu, indicates me or my. It's still possessive, but now it's not third person, it's first person. Instead of being the faith of the object, of the person that the sentence is talking about, it's the faith of the person doing the speaking. So this should either be the prophet or should be God, since the prophet is speaking God's words. So the English reveals this as well. If he should draw back, speaking of the righteous person, my soul has no pleasure in him. But, notice the phrase, but the just shall live by my faith. Well, we can instantly rule out that this is not the faith of the prophet Habakkuk that is referring to. The just doesn't live by the faith of the prophet. Rather, since these are the words of God himself being conveyed by the prophet, we can instantly concur that the my here, the possessive, is the possession of God. So the verse is trying to say in the Septuagint version that the just, right, the kaios, shall live by zesetai, shall live by my faith. Whose faith? By God's faith. Notice we have changed from the Masoretic, his faith, to the faith of God. So now we have got a slight difference here. The Septuagint translators felt that this was the import of the verse, so they changed the way the possessive was being conveyed from the faith of the person to the faith of God himself. Not a terribly different way to understand the verse. But notice now when we get to Paul's two uses of this passage, Paul does something even rather more peculiar than what the Septuagint translators did. Paul had the Septuagint at his disposal. He knew that the Septuagint translators had added the word mu in favor of the original Masoretic, saying that it was the faith of the person. He realized that the Greek now indicated that it was the faith of God that was being conveyed in the verse. So rather than carrying that word over into the Greek in his translation from Romans 1:17, he simply says, "Ha dedekaios ek pistios zeisetai." Notice between the word pistios and zeisetai, right here, pistios, in the Septuagint version, we would have the word mu. So that would say, "Ha dedekaios ek pistios mu zeisetai." But Paul chops that out. He takes that out and simply says, "Ha dedekaios ek pistios zeisetai." The righteous by faith, not of me, and not of himself, not his faith, but rather the righteous by faith will live. It's almost as if he simply takes the theology behind the Masoretic rendering and the theology behind the Septuagint Greek rendering, and he combines the two for one third option that simply, kind of generally speaking, says that the righteous person will live by faith, and leaves it kind of open to discussion. Is it the faith of the person that he lives by, or is it the faith of God that he lives by? And so he does the same thing in the Galatians passage as well. Looking at the phrase in question, the clause at the very end, I'm not really going to focus on the earlier clause, the first clause, but the second clause, "Ha dekaios ek pistios zeisetai." There's one Greek word left out here, the word de, and, but I mean that doesn't terribly alter the rendering. He simply says, "The righteous by faith will live." Again, between the word pistios and the word zeisetai, he does not bring in any type of possessive pronoun that would indicate whether it's the faith of the person that by his faith, or it is the faith of God, like we had in the Septuagint rendering. The person will live by my faith. So I thought that was kind of interesting to bring us into this discussion that we're going to be having tonight about faith versus faithfulness.